For half of that race at least, I was absolutely stunned at the reliabilities of these new cars. Then that was abruptly ended when Gasly, Verstappen and Perez all ground to a halt.
You can't park this, huh?
Some in more dramatic fashion than others. And everyone was understandably worried about the reliabilities of these Red Bull power units. Now, were these all linked or were they separate issues? And you guessed it, Scarbs is back to explain. So for the Red Bull teams, there were 4 issues. Gasly's fire, Max's steering, Max's engine, and Checo's engine. And on the surface of it, they all look linked, but they're not.
For Pierre Gasly, his race retirement was down to, it appears, an MG UK failure. The MG UK is the big hybrid motor on the side of the engine. And it looked like it had a catastrophic failure, something that we have seen in the past with the Honda/Red Bull powertrains setup. And such a failure that clearly fluid was leaking out from some part of the power unit that caught fire, caused problems in the back of the car.
Now this will mean that AlphaTauri will have to go back and replace the MG UK, as well as some of the other bits of the rear of the car. Certainly the bodywork. Did you see how burnt all that bodywork looked? Anyway, all of that will have to go. And the MG UKs are limited for every season, so this could hurt them later on in the year. Then there were Max's issues. Just after he made his last stop, he came out on the radio and said he almost can't steer. Now he said it was the same in both directions, which immediately led me to think it was a hydraulic issue, and that would make sense, right? Hard to steer in both directions. It led straight to the power steering. But apparently not.
It transpires the initial analysis from the team was when the car was dropped from the jacks at that pit stop, something bent the track rod, which is the arm that goes from the steering rack out to the front wheels to steer the wheels. So I've looked at all of his pit stops through the race. They all looked exactly the same, coming into the pits, hitting the jack, coming off the jack and pulling away. I can't see any difference. Really unusual. Don't really know exactly where the bend was or what their solution for this will be, but very unusual. And Max was really lucky in some respects to be able to continue.
So Max's steering must have been incredibly heavy, and you probably know what steering a normal car is like without power steering, but with all the downforce loads at high speed, this must have been absolutely mental. But the big question at the time was whether these two issues were linked. I didn't know if it was a wider hydraulic issue causing both of them, but apparently not.
Actually sitting there sketching and trying to work out how you could have the same failure on all of the cars and trying to work out why there was a fire, and I just couldn't add them up. After the race, again, the initial analysis suggests that it was a fuel pump failure. And it gets slightly complicated here to explain exactly what's gone on. This year, the part of the fuel pump system has become a spec part, or a standard supply component, as the FIA call it.
So this does all mean that the issue could be with the spec part, so a part that is provided to all of the teams by the FIA. And this is the whole fuel system, from the collector all the way up to the high pressure pump. All is the same for all of the teams.
After qualifying, the teams were given more time before they hit Parc Fermé to inspect these pumps. Red Bull took this opportunity. McLaren and probably all of the top 10 teams did, and McLaren changed their pumps. Red Bull, it appears, it didn't, and this is the pump which we think is the problem. Now, the plastic insulation surrounding the electronics, what we understand is that's been breaking down because of this new E10 fuel, which is high in ethanol, very volatile, very aggressive to materials, and that has led to the pump failing.
And that all looks to add up, with Max having issues straight after the safety car restart. So this might mean that it's not just a Red Bull issue. We'll have to see later on in the season.
There's no suggestion that Red Bull have been tampering with this. And in fact, there's no performance gain to tamper with this pump because it's not a performance pump. However, their fuel could be more aggressive to the plastics insulating electronics. A quick fix would be to potentially put some additional insulation around the pump and its electronics, something that is resistant to the fuel.
And we would expect this is what Red Bull will do. They are allowed to do it, and it would be feasible within the 4 or 5 days they have until running in Saudi this weekend. Or Scarbs has another theory for another possible cause of this issue.
The other theory is it wasn't the pump at all, but it was actually more like vapor lock or problems with the E10 fuel. When you get to very low levels of fuel in the tank, you get a lot of vapor being risen from the fuel, and you can have problems just getting the fuel into the pumps in the first place. The third solution, which is the Red Bull fuel, which is obviously also run by AlphaTauri, and that would mean a reblend of the fuel. Fuels are homologated just like the engines are this year. Technically, they can't change the fuel through the year for performance reasons, but as with the engine, they are allowed to change the blending of the fuel for reliability issues.
And it looks like Perez had the same issue, but on the final lap of the race.
Then Sergio Perez was losing power. This came on much more suddenly than it did with Max and led to the engine cutting out as he went into turn one, while already defending because of his lack of power to Hamilton. He spun. Now, some people are a bit confused by this, why he spun. As he went into the corner, the engine stopped. And when the engine stops, that effectively locks up the rear wheels because obviously you've got a lot of friction inside the engine. And as you're going into a corner, very easy would make the car spin. He didn't have time to whip the clutch in or for the anti-stall to kick in. Again, if the engine stopped, you have no hydraulic pressure, so you wouldn't be able to operate the clutch anyway.
And it must have sucked to be a Red Bull driver this weekend, but I'm sure it'll be fixed for the weekend in Saudi. You would expect them to be much closer to the Ferraris this week with far more quicker corners. You should check out this video where Scott breaks down the battle between Max and Charles this weekend. There was a lot to cover there. Thanks for watching and subscribing, and I'll catch you in the next one.